I quote, "Not a fan of Kyle Busch by no means, but no one can say that he's not a wheelman." Jonathan Grissop says, "How many nights did Petty show up to a Wednesday night show and cherry pick wins from lower funded teams? The Cup Series hasn't always run the type of format that we see today." So again, I got respect for Kyle Busch because obviously Paul, by the way, we're talking to Paul Szmal from New York, motorsports personality, and on Finish Line coming up in just a few moments. We're going to talk to Bubba Pollard, super late model winner of the Cars Tour, Solid Rock Carriers 300, our coverage here of Finish Line presented by All About Wraps. But again, Paul, what I was talking about is Kyle Busch has not got that ego of, man, I'm coming after 200. Look out, Richard Petty, I'm going to pass you. We haven't heard that from him. His quest for 200 is a totally different level than where Richard Petty got his. And Jonathan Grissop in the chat box, I will say, I agree with you because, back in the day, Paul, the NASCAR Cup Series was not the Cup Series. It was the Grand National Series. So wouldn't the Grand National Series actually been dubbed today as the Xfinity Series? And they raced on asphalt, and they raced at local tracks, not just big speedways. So could you say that verbatim, Richard Petty cherry-picked to get some of those 200 wins?
There's probably some validity to that. Everybody celebrates Richard Petty as the king, and the mark of 200 Cup victories, I don't think will be surpassed in our lifetimes or maybe in our kids' lifetimes.
Right.
This is why I say it's an apples and oranges comparison. It's a fun thing for racing fans to debate and argue about and make their points, but can I say that Richard Petty was a better driver than Kyle Busch? No, I can't say that. Richard Petty was the driver of his era. Kyle Busch may very well be, from a skill standpoint, the driver of his era.
Right.
Now, when it comes to attitude and professionalism, night and day difference. We could definitely make a comparison there because Petty was a class act all the way, and Kyle is Kyle. He is what he is. Some people like him for that. Some people hate him for it.
Absolutely. A few more minutes remaining with Mr. Paul Szmal. Paul, what's on your agenda this year, my friend? Announcing, I know that you haven't had no off season like me. There is no off season in racing anymore. If you work full time in motorsports, there is no off season anymore. Whether you're announcing outdoors, indoors, motorsports shows, what's on the docket for 2019 for Paul Szmal?
Well, it's not a full-time. Actually, let me say that I have two full-time jobs. I'm operations manager of a cluster of radio stations in the Finger Lakes in New York, where I live, and I have very understanding management that lets me go out and play on the weekends and do the racing thing. So this year, I'm doing a limited schedule on Fridays at Freedom Motorsports Park, where the super late models are the headliner. We have ULMS coming in for a couple of shows, Empire Super Sprints coming in for a show. Saturday, I'm hooking up with Brett Deo at Fonda Speedway,
awesome,
which is my third tour of duty at Fonda, a place that I've always enjoyed just because it has so much character and it's so unique. Sundays, I'm going to be going across the river from Fonda to Glenridge Motorsports Park, and I just penciled in this past weekend a couple of dates with Joe Skodnicki at Spencer, and also a couple of special events at the Adirondack International Speedway, which is up in Lowville, up on the footsteps of the Adirondack Mountains. They're running a midweek dirt sportsman race where they're going to run the dirt sportsman modifieds on pavement, on dirt tires, which I think is phenomenal. And also they have a New York Superstock Series race that I'm going to jump in on in September. And I'm sure I'm going to pick up some other stuff along the way. I actually did the math just a couple of days ago to figure out exactly how many dates I'm doing, and so far I have about 60 plugged into the pipeline, but that's not counting past September.
Absolutely,
which means I'll probably have another dozen or so.
And then, of course, I know you go down to Daytona after Christmas for WKA Speed Week. That's always a big one, Kart Week. And then, of course, it looks like you're going to be down in February for the Short Track Super Series Big Block Modified event. I really hope that the powers that be, the race fans in the Southeast, will take advantage of what Wendell Durrance, All Tech Raceway, and what Brett Deo and the Short Track Super Series are doing, bringing the big block modifieds to All-Tech Raceway, because normally the only time they get to race is only 2 or 3 nights, and that's during the Dirt Car Nationals at Volusia. This is going to give an opportunity for these guys to shine. Being a man up in the Northeast, knowing about those big block modifieds, preach on about it, Paul.
Oh, yeah. And the nice thing is these are not in direct competition with each other. It's a little bit of synchronicity. That's where right. The events at All-Tech are actually happening the week before the Dirt Car Nationals at Volusia. And I think you're going to see a fair amount of drivers that are going to make the sacrifice of taking the vacation time or whatever to do both ends. And, that's good for everybody to have drivers that are going to be able to do both sides of this. It's a financial commitment because you're running one set of tires perhaps for the STSS, and maybe you run the American Racers for that. You're going to run the Hoosiers when you're on the Dirt Car Big Block Series. But it's definitely a boon, and it's nice to get this form of racing out of its element. It's great that we have the World Finals at Charlotte every year. That has become a destination event. But the modifieds, let's be honest about this, the modifieds are number 3 on the bill behind the World of Outlaws sprint cars and the late models. Here, the modifieds are taking center stage at a facility where they are the show. And, the following week at Volusia, again, they're, lumped in with the other dirt car divisions, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Paul, we just wrapped up.
In the Southeast, it's worth going to both if you can swing it.
You know what, Paul? We just wrapped up Speed Weeks not even a week ago, 2 weeks ago, officially. Hendry County doing their Speed Weeks this year in the Everglades. I went down there. I went to Volusia. I went to Bubba Raceway announcing events. Needmore had a Speed Week event in Georgia. By the way, they crank up this weekend. Southern Clash 1500 to win late model show. We'll talk about that in upcoming races. In addition to that, besides Daytona, besides talking about ARCA and Speed Weeks and the Cup Series, Xfinity, the Gander Outdoor program and whatnot, the duels, the Clash, qualifying, and whatever, has Speed Weeks just got too out of hand, Paul? Is there too many tracks that are sticking their nose in the ballot trying to do Speed Week events? Is that good, or is that bad, or is that disrespectful for tracks like East Bay or Volusia or even Bubba Raceway that's done Bubba Winter Nationals for like the last 10 years, while all these other tracks, and not only that, taken away from the asphalt event, the World Series of Asphalt Short Track Racing at New Smyrna. Have we got too many tracks in the South doing Speed Weeks, and it's taken away from what Speed Weeks used to be about?
I think you can make an argument in both directions for that, Wesley, and I'm not really sure what if there's a right answer of yes, it's too much, it's overexposing the product, and it's sending things out too much, or no, if the demand is there, why not do it? I will say this, that one of the good things about having these different tracks doing their different things is, number one, not everybody's trying to do it in the same week.
Absolutely.
Thank God. Because that really would be overexposure. The other thing is you're getting different flavors. I mean, racing is ice cream. It's different flavors of ice cream. Well, you go to East Bay, you got the Winter Nationals for the dirt late models. That's one flavor. You go to Volusia, you got sprint cars. You got the modifieds that the rest of the country knows. You've got the Northeastern modifieds. That's a different flavor. You go to Smyrna, you got the asphalt modifieds and the super late models. That's a different flavor. Showtime Speedway, running a figure 8 event. That's a completely different flavor. As long as the different flavors are there and there's enough fan support and driver support for these events to be profitable, bring it on.
Okay.
You have to ask yourself, both as a fan and as a promoter, can I put a product out there that is going to be compelling and different enough that I'm going to draw drivers in the back gate and fans in the front gate?
Absolutely.
If the answer to one of those questions is no, then it's time to get off the train.
Paul, final question or comment for you on this. And Jonathan Grissop has followed up on what he just said a few moments ago in regards to Petty and Busch. Look at the win percentage of David Pearson. How many wins could he have had if he would have ran a full schedule? I love Petty, but he still was not the best of his era. Now, if you remember counting, I believe David Pearson did not run but only 3 or 4 years full-time when he ran in the Cup Series. Everything else was partially part-time, and he accumulated 121 NASCAR victories. I want to say he's second on the all-time win list.
Yes, he is. And as a matter of fact, I have an affinity for David Pearson because that was the answer to a trivia question at a Daytona 500 viewing party that I went to several years ago in one of the suites at Watkins Glen International. I happened to get the question right, and I have a Denny Hamlin fender that sits on display in my house because I got that question right. So thank you, David Pearson.
Absolutely. So, can we follow up on that? Do you think that David Pearson could been at one time, or is David Pearson not even being looked at as probably one of the greats of NASCAR? Obviously, I don't mean to say this. Obviously, he's respected. He is respected. The Silver Fox is respected for what he's done in the industry. But, is he not getting the credit that he should deserve, being second on the all-time win list, and could he have surpassed Petty of 200-plus wins because he didn't race full-time?
Well, let's turn this question around because, again, we're trying to make comparisons here. Pearson, higher win percentage than Petty. What about Richie Evans? Richie Evans, how many NASCAR modified championships did he win? How many individual NASCAR modified races did he win?
That's true.
Do these guys get the run that they deserve for the accomplishments they've made? And I think the answer to that question is dependent upon who you are and what your knowledge is. The newer generation of NASCAR fans that have grown up watching the Kyle Bushes and the Tony Stewarts and the Denny Hamlins don't have the knowledge of the history of the sport that people like you and I and like some of the people that are commenting, we have that knowledge. Some of us actually lived this stuff and witnessed it firsthand. So, it's easier for us to sit there and go, well, wait a minute, these guys, man, these new guys can't hold a handle to what these guys did back in the day. But again, it's different cars, different eras, different times, different technology. Each of them, I think, are great and should be respected and revered for their own individual accomplishments. That goes for David Pearson. That goes for Richie Evans. That goes for Richard Petty, Kyle Busch, Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt, Cale Yarborough, Bobby Allison, any person who is considered to be even remotely iconic or influential in the sport because of their contribution to it should be given their due respect for it.
We're going to wrap things up here with Paul Szmal here in just a moment. Coming up, Bubba Pollard. Bubba Pollard out of Sonoma, Georgia, winner of the super late model portion of the Solid Rock Carriers 300 from Southern National over the weekend. Of course, he joins us on the program. Colleague and respected veteran Jack Arute in the broadcasting world says that Bubba Pollard is the superstar in this world, this decade of short track racing. So we're going to chat it up with Bubba Pollard here in a moment. Also, Brandon Pierce got a big, emotional, exciting win for Lee Pulliam in at Southern National in the late model stock cars tour event. We'll talk about that. And, of course, Ches Chester, winner of the MODOK 100 in South Carolina. Coming up, so we got a little asphalt for you, got a little dirt for you. We'll talk about some drag racing. They've got, of course, the NHRA going to be in action this weekend at the Gator Nationals in Gainesville, Florida. But, Paul, my final question to you is this, buddy. I know you're a native up in Syracuse. You've announced races in Syracuse this past weekend. You mentioned Oswego Speedway, Oswego, New York, and for the last couple of years now, the World Racing Group, Dirt Car Racing, the Super Dirt Car Series, Big Block Modifieds, and more have had their granddaddy of racing, Super Dirt Week, at Oswego Speedway. That is an asphalt track where they, after shut down the Syracuse Moody Mile Fairgrounds, have been racing the Super Dirt Week program at Oswego. This will be the third year that they've done it. Do they need to continue, or do you think it's time to look elsewhere? What's your thoughts?
I think absolutely it needs to continue, and a lot of people question, well, why Oswego? And there's a very simple answer to that question, and it has to do with grandstand capacity.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Oswego is the only other facility that has the grandstand capacity that even resembles what Syracuse used to be in its heyday.
Exactly.
Yeah. The grandstand at Syracuse, the covered grandstand at Syracuse, seated exactly 12,040 people. And if you use the overflow stands, you could add another 3,000
awesome.
stands that were over on the turn 4 side of the covered stands. Oswego's the only thing that comes close to that. And the fact that it is a one-off, nobody gets to run it any other time of year except during Super Dirt Week, that is the same kind of formula that made Syracuse successful, because other than the July 4th